I think wisdom leads to seeing the importance of not knowing. And, this is something as you know, and many people will know, is very important in Chinese philosophy and in Zen, which is really just a version of Chan, a Japanese version of Chinese Chan tradition. But in those traditions, one's conceptual mind is deliberately disconcerted. The whole purpose of Zen is to put you off guard so that you no longer cover the world over with your ready-made concepts, but actually are suddenly exposed to something that may just be able to get through and speak to you. In this, it reminds me of Shelley's wonderful lines about the imagination, that it can take from reality the cloak of familiarity which has fallen over it and disguised it and prevented us from seeing the wonder of our being. And so imagination enables us to remove that cloak of familiarity. And I think that's a very important part of art. And by art, I mean music and poetry as well as the visual arts, but also of religion, that much of the purpose of religion is to get one to a place beyond knowing. And Dogen's saying that when I was seeking enlightenment, the mountains were just mountains and the rivers were just rivers. When I reached enlightenment, the mountains were no longer mountains and the rivers were, or when I thought I was on the journey, I've got this wrong. Let me start again. Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Before I started the search for enlightenment, I thought mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. While I was on the search for enlightenment, I thought that mountains were not mountains and rivers were not rivers. But now that I'm enlightened, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I love that. That reminds me of your journey, or the point of life is to return where you started and know the place for the first time.
Absolutely.
I would like to know, personally in your life, this is something I found as well in mine, is that there are many truths that I held as an 8-year-old or 10-year-old, and then as I became a teenager and the more stalwart, inexorable atheist type, I rejected them. And then as I've grown older, I've grown more open to them. I'm not just speaking about religious affairs, but just, or metaphysical affairs, but even theories or ideas. I want to know, what's an example in your life that a mountain was a mountain before? You then abandoned it and you came back. No, you know what? A mountain is a mountain. You know that mountain is a mountain in a deeper sense.
Yes. Well, of course, the point is that the mountain as seen by the enlightened person is a mountain, but it is fully a mountain, whereas before there was a very much diminished idea of what a mountain was. And this is really rather like my view about matter, which is that one sees matter as just lumpen matter initially. And one then goes through a phase of thinking, but there's so much more. And that must be over and above matter. But there is a way of coming back to a position which I hold, in which matter is just a version of the ontological primitive, which is consciousness. So all is consciousness, which doesn't mean I'm a straightforward idealist in the sense of Donald Hoffman or perhaps Bernardo Kastrup. And certainly not in the sense of Berkeley. But I think that's an example of, where you thought you knew something, and then you go through a process of thinking about it differently, and finally you can see a reconciliation here. So it's like the way in which the right hemisphere enables one to see that, yes, the left hemisphere is not just useless and problematic. It has its virtues, and they're needed. It is the emissary that was sent to do the task because it was particularly skillful. And so it's good. It's only bad when it thinks it's the master. And so it's another of these cases where if one could get the left hemisphere to understand that it is not being it's not being dismissed or despised. It's just being told not to think that it is the master, because it absolutely isn't. It sees only a very small part of whatever is. And one of the ways of thinking about reductionism and organicism, which I'm convinced of, is that everything is actually organic, but in an organic structure, if you focus in, you can find in this immensely complex system of things that have feedback loops onto others and interact with other things in a way that's almost impossible to model. You can find little areas where there is a linear chain, where A leads to B leads to C. And even in the most complex diagram of an organic system, you can see these little chains. Now, those are where mechanism can be brought to bear. You can say, I can interrupt this chain and cause something to be different. And you do it, and lo and behold, it is different. And, this is very good. The trouble with this is, it is a success, but it makes us think that the structure of the whole we're looking at is mechanical, but it's not. It's organic.
So I would like to explore dogma some more, because when I hear you say, I'm convinced of organicism, it sounds to me like a truth. Like, I'm convinced of this. That sounds like a left-brain certainty. So you can dispel that. But also, I would like to give an example of the upside of dogma. Again, so Scott Aronson is a quantum information computer scientist. He was saying after Trump had his ear shot at, that, look, he was making a call for nonviolence, even though Scott considers himself to be on the left. He was saying, even if there's political violence and you found out and you're a utilitarian, you want to maximize expected utility, and even if you did some calculation and you found out it's worth it in the long run for us to temporarily subject our enemies to torment, then he said, I would sooner give up being an expected utility maximizer than give up the principle of nonviolence.
Mm.
And I was extremely touched by that. I sent him an email about that. That specific line has stuck with me. I would give up being an expected utility maximizer. For someone who's so rational like Scott Aronson to say that.
Yes.
There's something underneath that. And that sounds like dogma to me. It sounds like a principle that I hold sacred that I'm not going to give up. And even Jesus said many statements that are unequivocal, like, truly I say to you, you will not see the kingdom if you do so-and-so, or truly I say to you. Almost any of the truly I say to yous are straightforward. I am saying this to you. This is how it is. It's not like, maybe I'm going to say this to you.
Yes.
So let me know what your thoughts are on that, please.
Well, I don't think that anything is so certain that I could never be wrong. So it's just shorthand to say I'm pretty certain that organicism triumphs over mechanism, and I have very good reasons for saying that. Certainly in the living world, but even in the non-living world. So what I mean when I say I'm certain of something is, it should be read as simply, I'm as certain as one can be about this. This has become more and more convincing to me over my lifetime. And really, it is always a matter of a process. One becomes more convinced of something. But in order to make conversation a little less clunky, one doesn't always qualify everything by saying, well, of course, everything is up for grabs eventually, but. So that's what I'd say about that. I mean, about having a principle, and I argue against utilitarianism anyway, and long-termism and things like that. But let's take your friend who nonetheless is a utility maximizer, a deeply immoral position in my view, and he is taking. It sounds to me like a dogmatic view that this can never be tempered. And of course, this is as old as the hills. In wartime, there are people who are conscientious objectors. And, sometimes they were asked, well, if an armed soldier was coming towards you and your sister and was going to rape her and kill you, would you not take any action to... would you not shoot him then? Would you not, if you had a gun, would you not shoot him? And it's always possible to say absolutely not. I think Quakers are pretty, in my experience, pretty 100% dogmatic about what they will and won't do. But I think that everything is contextual, and there are contexts that will excuse something that one should normally never contemplate. And those circumstances or sets of circumstances or contexts are going to be rare and rather special, very, very special. I mean, I gave a talk in London just before I set off for Japan, called The Sovereignty of Truth. And in talking about truth, which I think is enormously important and very much as you know, degraded and depraved now, the search for truth is something that people seem to have abandoned, or many people have anyway. So truth is deeply important. And I mentioned a book that impressed me very much when it came out in 1978 by a philosopher, Cicely Bock, called Lying. And she argued that there were no circumstances in which it was okay to lie. And I said, I don't think I agree with her, but nonetheless, the point is a very good one, that we should always think extremely hard about a lie. We shouldn't lie ever casually. But there were always going to be some extreme circumstances in which you lie. If, for example, you're protecting Anne Frank and the house is being searched, you lie, you cover up. This is okay. So there will always be circumstances, but these are the really fringe cases. And so you sent me a thing by Dan Dennett in which he was saying, he talked about fuss budgeting, which is, I know it's an Americanism, it's one I quite like, fuss budgeting about what do we call them, fringe cases. So if there is a fringe case, then doesn't your position fall? And he's quite right. No, it doesn't. There are fringe cases that can't be decided, and so one can never be 100% certain in anything.
Just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Hey, I see you inching away. Don't be like The Economy. Instead, read The Economist. I thought all The Economist was something that CEOs read to stay up to date on world trends. And that's true, but that's not only true. What I found more than useful for myself personally is their coverage of math, physics, philosophy, and AI, especially how something is perceived by other countries and how it may impact markets. For instance, The Economist had an interview with some of the people behind DeepSeek the week DeepSeek was launched. No one else had that. Another example is The Economist has this fantastic article on the recent dark energy data, which surpasses even Scientific American's coverage, in my opinion. They also have the chart of everything. It's like the chart version of this channel. It's something which is a pleasure to scroll through and learn from. Links to all of these will be in the description, of course. Now, The Economist's commitment to rigorous journalism means that you get a clear picture of the world's most significant developments. I am personally interested in the more scientific ones, like this one on extending life via mitochondrial transplants, which creates actually a new field of medicine, something that would make Michael Levin proud. The Economist also covers culture, finance and economics, business, international affairs, Britain, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, China, Asia, the Americas, and of course, the USA. Whether it's the latest in scientific innovation or the shifting landscape of global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage, and it goes far beyond just headlines. Look, if you're passionate about expanding your knowledge and gaining a new understanding, a deeper one, of the forces that shape our world, then I highly recommend subscribing to The Economist. I subscribe to them, and it's an investment into your intellectual growth. It's one that you won't regret. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get a special 20% off discount. Now you can enjoy The Economist and all it has to offer for less. Head over to their website, www.economist.com/toe, TOE, to get started. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get back to the exploration of the mysteries of our universe. Again, that's economist.com/toe.